do the introduction of our first speaker today, Ambassador Ravintha Aryasinha, Secretary Foreign Relations, as the Secretary to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on 31st October 2018. Ambassador Aryasinha was Additional Secretary, Economic Affairs, Trade in the Foreign Ministry since April 2018. Having joined the Sri Lankan Foreign Service in 1988, he was second secretary in New Delhi and minister, and later deputy chief of mission with ambassador rank in Washington, D.C. He served as ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg, to the European Union during April 2008 to June 2012, and as Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva and Council General of Sri Lanka to Switzerland during 2012 to July 2012 to March 2018. While being concurrently Sri Lanka's ambassador to the Holy See between 1995 to 2000 and in 2007-2008, he headed the Public Communications Division and was the Foreign Ministry spokesman. On leaving from the Foreign Service in 1993 to 1995, he served as the information officer in the Office of the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Sri Lanka. Prior to joining the Sri Lanka Foreign Service, he was a pioneer in setting up of Rupavahini, national television network of Sri Lanka, where he served as a senior political correspondent, news editor from 1982 to 1988. Foreign Secretary Aryasinha is a past student of Ananda College, Colombo. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Peradeniya and Master of Arts degree in International Relations from the University of Colombo. He is a Hearst Fellow in International Relations at the School of International Service, American University, Washington, D.C. in 2001 and 2002. Without further ado, may I invite Mr. Aryasinha to speak on the role of foreign employment in the economic revival of Sri Lanka. Over to you, Mr. Aryasinha.
Thank you, Dulita. Good morning to all joining this session. I want to congratulate the President of the OPA and all members of the organization, and particularly those responsible for persevering with the annual session despite the limitations cast on us by Corona-19. I thank the President of the OPA for inviting me to join you today on and speak to the role of foreign employment in the economic revival of Sri Lanka. I have added a part to it, which I want to construct as the challenges and opportunities. By all accounts, it is widely acclaimed that Sri Lanka did exceptionally well in facing, managing, and since 1st May, ensuring that not a single case of social transmission of COVID-19 has been reported. According to the Health Ministry, as we speak, the recovery rate of Sri Lanka's COVID-19 patients is at 80.55%, which is considerably higher than the world recovery rate of 56.39%. With only 11 deaths, the last on 1st June 2020, the fatality rate of Sri Lankan COVID-19 patients is only 0.55%, which is also significantly lower than the global fatality rate of 5.2%. This success must be attributed, as stated previously also by the Honorable Prime Minister, to the leadership given by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who through the early appointment of a COVID task force had prepared for all contingencies, and the health, security, other emergency services as well as the public services which marshaled the officers to adapt to and deal with the emerging challenges. Commendations must also go to the finance sectors and captains of industry, tourism, aviation, who supported all efforts to ensure that the economy functioned even under these unprecedented circumstances. An all-important task the government was confronted with in parallel was, while catering to the protection and needs of those within the borders of Sri Lanka, was to address the ramifications of the pandemic on overseas Sri Lankans from this global situation. The crisis situation created by this pandemic around the world was particularly relevant given that about 10% of Sri Lanka's population live abroad. According to the Central Bank report of 2019, based on SLBFE figures, 30% of these are domestic workers, 25% unskilled, and another 30% skilled workers, and mainly residing and working in countries in the GCC, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. I believe your invitation to me today to lead off the discussion in this segment is an acknowledgement of the relevance of the Ministry of Foreign Relations and also the Foreign Employment Ministry, both led by my Minister, Honorable Dinesh Gunawardena, supported by the Secretary to the Ministry of Foreign Employment, as well as officials of those that ministry, and also the Foreign Employment Bureau, in facing the challenges presented as a result of COVID to the OSLs. As a starting point, I would like to note that through a series of 5 notes to the Cabinet, through our missions abroad and bilateral group consultations, particularly with labor receiving countries, the Foreign Ministry has able to identify priorities early on and to address them. Today, my remarks will focus on the immediate twin challenges we collectively faced over the past 5 months in repatriation of those who wanted to return, and secondly, to meet the existential needs of the bulk of the overseas Sri Lankans across the globe who chose to remain where they are. The deeper lessons learned in the process of doing so, which I will approach as challenges and opportunities in the realm of foreign employment brought about in the wake of COVID crisis, I believe is the more important task. I would also argue that despite its immediate bloom, the present situation can be a harbinger for the economic revival of Sri Lanka, and in correcting structural, procedural, and human interface incongruities in labor migration. It also presents an opportunity for Sri Lanka to reorient the opportunities for foreign employment for our people in a post-COVID world sensitive to the ground realities, both in Sri Lanka and the migrant receiving countries, so that the future footprint of foreign employment Sri Lanka provides the world might be smaller, but also smarter and more sustainable. As far as repatriation is concerned, from the Foreign Ministry's perspective, over 8,644 people have been repatriated since 21st April. And if you go back to the time from when we brought students from Wuhan, this number would increase to 10,355 with those stranded in India and some intermittent groups from Italy, Korea, and Europe. Based on our web portal, presently 52,401 overseas Sri Lankans from 117 countries have sought to be repatriated as of the middle of this month. Students awaiting to return are 4.9%, short-term visa holders are 11.12%, while the rest, 39,000, are migrant workers, 75% of which are migrant workers, and 50% of them are living in the Middle East. Now, the Foreign Ministry's responsibility in this repatriation process is essentially in setting course, liaising with the Presidential Secretariat and the COVID Presidential Task Force, particularly, and Sri Lankan, which largely flows them in, and security forces which are responsible for quarantine, and the health authorities who had to prepare for contingencies. Sometimes this has resulted in having to reconcile contending rationalities, and even requiring course correction, which we have done through a series of cabinet papers from mid-April. A key limitation naturally has been the locations and the availability of quarantine facilities. And as a result, we have been more careful in having to bring back the foreign employment category, because particularly after the return of Kuwaitis, where 370 out of the 466 tested for COVID. The need for rotational selection of destinations and preparation for better availability of medical facilities in the event that large groups were to be infected has proved to be a very serious challenge. As of now, according to the plans laid out by the government, by the 7th of July, there would have been at least one flight to all destinations which have a large migrant worker presence, with multiple flights to Mali, Dubai, Qatar, Singapore, and Bangladesh. Now, if we look at the second aspect, which is the meeting of the existential needs of OSLs who have chosen to remain, particularly here again, the migrant worker category is very important. The early setting up of the Contact Sri Lanka web portal by the Foreign Ministry in March, on the 26th of March 2020, has been particularly effective. So far, 86,613 Sri Lankans have registered on it, and 12,912 have posed questions from across the globe, mainly on assistance on repatriation and consular issues, but also related to other operational and policy matters. Now, our work, guided by the issues thrown up by the portal, particularly I'm focusing again on the migrant worker category, which has been the more predominantly category which there have been more issues to deal with. First was providing relief assistance for those who stayed back. We have done so in the Middle East and in other locations. On the one hand, through contributions, working together with the Sri Lanka communities in those countries and some of the non-governmental organizations based in those countries, as well as help from the governments concerned. But in recent times, in places we found them having difficulty yet, we have in fact sent food packages from Sri Lanka. We have done this in the Maldives, we have done it to Qatar, and last 2 days ago to Oman. We will be continuing to do this wherever possible in places where those countries permit that facility. Another important aspect we have tried to help them is in remittance of money to Sri Lanka. Now, this has both an effect on families back home and also an effect on the current account balance. And as a result, since mid-April, we have been together with the central bank looking at ways of promoting and facilitating fund remittance, as we found that most remittances do not come through the traditional channels, and some countries are more significant in this. This has seen the fruition recently with the government through the central bank and state banks, including the Regional Development Bank, advocating an incentive payment scheme to all those who remit foreign currencies to Sri Lanka, mainly to benefit migrant workers, in order that they get some extra money. It entails giving 10 rupees per dollar equivalent or the equivalent to that amount, depending on the currency of remittance, over the standard bank buying rate, so that inward remittance is further incentivized. We also have reached out to diplomatic representations on behalf of our nationals. The most significant, I think, is in Rome. We are trying to facilitate to provide consular assistance to what may be up to about 10,000 Sri Lankans in the process of regularizing their visa status. In Lebanon, UAE and Qatar, we have succeeded in getting free of charge the PCR testing, which was a new addition to the checks which we have instituted to ensure that those who come back to Sri Lanka are healthy, and those who might have difficulties can be anticipated and dealt with. Then in countries like Poland and Jordan, we have been able to find jobs for those who have lost jobs in collaboration with the governments concerned. In Korea, rotation of migrant workers has already commenced. Batch who are in Sri Lanka on holiday and those who are to replace those coming out are already on their way, while those who have completed their terms are ready to come in the next couple of days. In Cuba, a Cuban medical team has been sent to attend to Sri Lankans employed in Haiti, another way of trying to ameliorate the difficulties. Now, unrelated directly to migrant workers, I must say that we have also been helping in cushioning the economic impact from the pandemic and the revival of the economy. And in terms of trade, investment and tourism, this has been a support to those agencies with which, through our economic diplomacy program, we have been working regularly before, but at this point, we are doing it in a much more concerted and imaginative way. Now, what are the challenges this has thrown up? One fact we have been hit by is the fact that a large part of our migrant workers are not registered with the SLBFE. And as a result, they have been unaccounted for and have suddenly sprung up in the process of our recording. Another aspect has been that in recent weeks, the undocumented numbers have been so significant that it is a challenge for both the people concerned and for Sri Lankan diplomacy. The Kuwait case was a classic example where, while we have about 110,000 in Kuwait, 18,000, according to the Kuwaiti authorities, are illegal.